As I was saying, that now the Neo-Crusades will then attack the Muslims and besiege them all the way up to the headquarters of Islam, which is Medina. And then tomorrow, the Muslims will be at their headquarters, making it very clear that you see, it is the West we're talking about. This majority of man is Roman, and they'll accept Islam, and this is the Eastern Romans we're talking about. There's a whole surah by the name of Surah Rum, and Sahih Muslim makes mention the last hour will happen when majority of man is Roman. This will happen after Yajuj or Majuj is killed. And Yajuj and Majuj is the most warlike of the Turkic people. This happens after the West is defeated at their own headquarters, and then Daniel is killed, and then Yajuj and Majuj is killed after the state of Israel is destroyed. Picture Daniel is going to be killed right in the area where the Jews are going to be, because they consider the greater Israeli project, where Alud, they want to be part of it. And all this is going to now culminate at the one singular point in time. That you see, the Neo-Crusades is launching the besiegement. The Mahdi's army is going to go to Ghouta and face the Neo-Crusades where? Ghouta will be where they're located. Neo-Crusades will be in Idlib or Damascus, Syria. They face each other off, and then will be a fierce battle. After this, the Muslims win in Constantinople with Tambir. Why? Because this war that happened, Mulam al-Kubra, was so vicious that the people who fight this war, if a person has 100 family members, 99 is killed. So literally, the West is defeated at this time. Before Jesus comes back, and before the Messiah comes back, who's that Joe? That's why they always talk about helping the Jews, especially the televangelists, and rebuilding the Temple of Solomon. Who are they building for? That's Joe. And the Jews waiting for thousands of years for the Moshiach to come and rule over them. And now, he's going to come for them. But the funny part is, he's going to travel to every city up to Mecca and Medina, but he will not be able to go to Mecca and Medina because the angels are going to guard it. And he's going to be moved to the direction of Shem, where he's killed. And he's killed in the area where the Jews want to conquer. The gates of Lud, they want this into the greater Israeli project, from the Nile River to Euphrates River. And right in the heart of them, which is not far from Mashalunsa, their own leader is dead. Picture the West is defeated before they can see their Messiah come. The Dajjal. Dajjal is killed by the true Messiah, Prophet Jesus Islam. Dajjal's army, who is a group of the Jews and some of the Turkic people, not the good ones, but the bad ones, who are not the Yajuj and Majuj, but in the south. They, with some of the Khawarij, the last of the Khawarij, with some of the Bedouin Arabs, and a set of women, large set of women, going to join him. This will happen. When Prophet Jesus comes, a miracle is going to happen that those who follow him and made his army is killed, destroyed, perished. Then Prophet Jesus kills that Job. If he didn't kill him with a spear, he would have already died because he was melt like salt in water when he see Jesus. Prophet Alahisalam. But Prophet Jesus is going to take a spear and spirit and show the blood, telling you a man cannot be the Lord. That shows in hell because the Hadith says any person killed in the hands of a prophet goes in hell. And since Daniel is Jewish and he's killed by the hands of Prophet Jesus, he's in hell. And so Islam will then dominate the Western lands. And then corruption is coming from the East. You remember, the Euphrates River throughout history was the dividing line between Eastern lands, Eastern nations, and Western lands and Western nations. So this sign of the Euphrates River dried up, it's not by accident. It's telling you that the major signs is about to happen. Because Dajjal is coming in the east, and he's the east of the Euphrates River. That's why Prophet Muhammad Alahisalam was the west of the Euphrates River, pointing and saying to you, this ummah, Dajjal is coming from the east. So you're going to see why the world is divided between east and west instead of north and south. Because you have northeast, east, and southeast. You have northwest, west, and southwest. But the earth is divided into eastern shift, western shift. Eastern shift is dominated by the Silk Road system, while western shift is dominated by maritime system, oceanic sea systems. Good. So now, what is needed to mention is that after you fight and after you conquer Constantinople, then you conquer the city of Rome, the headquarters of the Neo-Crusades, which is written all around the place. You see, the Crusades in the past was headed by the city of Rome in the Vatican. Tomorrow is going to be the same thing happen. Because according to Catholics and Protestants, they believe before Jesus comes back that all these divisions will be reunited back. And the Hadith tells you that they will be reunited at the city of Rome being the headquarters. And they will launch the new crusades, and the West will be back into crusade mentality. Rule based on the cross. Enlightenment, when it serves its purpose for Dajjal's cause, will be exterminated, and the West will return back to Christianity as you started to see it happen. And then they will be reunited through the chaos that beats. And from this point, they will be headed by the Neo Crusades from Vatican Rome, besiege the Muslims all the way up to Medina, and then the Mahdi's army will be what Saladin did, but by 1,000-fold. You see, Islam came as something strange and returns to something strange. When it came as something strange, It came with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu. I'm talking about the Ummah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu. Adam Alahisalam was a Muslim. All the prophets before were Muslims, but we focused on this Ummah. You see, he had to flee, our beloved Prophet, to Medina, where he died. And from this point in time, Islam spread all the way into Russia, spread into China, and spread all the way into Spain. And I'm telling you that it's mentioned, Islam came as something strange, and then it spread forward from Medina, widespread. And then it will return back as something strange even among the Muslims, to such an extent that you're divided into 73 sects and you annihilate each other. And then when we besieged back to Medina and Islam as something strange, then Islam will spread. And this time when it spreads, it will be a strong army. It will be 1,000 times of what Salahuddin did, because this is now going to be the basis of how the world will be Muslim. But you see, at that time, majority of man is Roman. But when will that happen? I'll tell you exactly when, based on Quran and Sunnah. And when Islam spreads, it spreads as the only religion on earth. But when the Mahdi comes, all the corruption that was there will reverse to now victory. And when Prophet Jesus comes, that's when Islam is the only religion. You see, when it says that the Mahdi's army will be responsible for defeating the Romans in the West, it didn't say all Romans. It didn't say all Christians. Why? Because if it was that, then what would be the need to abolish the jizya? What would be the need to break the cross if before Jesus comes back, the West must be defeated, and the city of Rome is conquered, which is the heart of the West, before Prophet Jesus comes back and before Dajjal comes back? When that comes back, but Dajjal rules. When Dajjal rules, he's destroyed. Then the state of Israel is destroyed. See? It says that in Surah 4, verse 159, that all the people of the book must believe in him, Prophet Jesus Alahisalam, before his death. You don't have a need to abolish the jizya if there's no Christians around, because the place is Muslim then. But no, Christians will be around, and when they see Jesus comes back, he brings an end to all religion on earth except Islam. At this time, the main religion will be Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. All these Far East nations is destroyed. All these pagan religions around the world, gone. That's why the focus here is on Christianity, with the cross, and Judaism, dealing with abolishing the jizya. So when the West is defeated, then Dajjal is killed, which is supposed to be the leader of the state of Israel. And when the state of Israel is destroyed, then the Turkic Mongolic, not the good Turks, rule will come back. Genghis Khan 2.0. And the title we get Juju Majuj in the next subject for Logos. When that happens, and when the Juju Majuj is killed, that's when the Romans, Eastern Romans, will truly make up the majority of mankind. The Arabs will remain, but as a nation, they'll be destroyed to such an extent, the ex-prophet Muhammad sallallahu. Where will the Arabs be on that day? See, there will be few, and they will be in the mountains. How many people can live in a mountain? Now you get my point. Now, getting to the point, Prophet Muhammad says, woe to the Arabs, for evil has happened. A hole has been made in the barrier of Yajuj or Majuj. Will we be destroyed? Now he says, Prophet Muhammad says, now yes, when the evil increase. But the ultimate destruction is Yajuj and Majuj. A few of the Arabs will remain, but as a nation will be destroyed. That's the time when the Romans make up the majority and Islam is the only religion on earth. When Yajuj and Majuj is killed. Killed how? When Prophet Jesus made the door and he fall down dead with worm coming out of their neck. Good. Getting to the point. So now, after explaining all of these things to you, we got to go back to some history. Slavery was there throughout the history. And now, you will find that the Eastern shift system is dominated by Turkic Mongolic rule. And then, Western civilization comes out, dominates and builds the world in one direction for Dajjal to come. At this time, the world is divided between eastern lands, western lands. And those lands is separated between the Euphrates River. I'm going to have to do another subject on the importance of how the Euphrates River, as we speak, is drying so much that people are walking across it. That even the source of that river is drying up in the Taurus Mountains. That the dams, the water in the dams is also decreasing as we speak. So we're witnessing the time when big things are happening. And so, throughout the Silk Road system, the Turkic Mongolic people dominated all these different nations of the Silk Road. And then, when they dominated it, another Turkic group or nation take over and dominates, and the process repeats until Pax, Mongolia. During this time of the Gog Turks, the Mongols and the Turks were known as the same people. Only recently, from Pax Mongolia and slowly up to today, they were identified as a different group, but their origins are the same people. Why were they mainly identified as different? It's because of slight differences in the language. But if you do the history, their origins eventually trace back to the same people. So they're the same thing. If you do the real history and have thousands of pages to only talk about that subject. So I'm not saying things just like that. I have to hold proof back everything that I'm saying up. And so now, what had happened was, under Pax Mongolia, the Turkic Mongolic people that makes up Pax Mongolia was like this. Genghis Khan, which name means Khan is ruler, and Genghis represents ocean. And in terms of Mongol beliefs, they believe that the ocean is symbolic to mean a universal dominance. widespread dominance. And according to their belief, they believe that they have a duty under the blue sky to dominate all the civilizations on earth. That you want peace, you must acknowledge who the Khan is. That we're going to give you the Mongol peace, the Turkic-Mongolic peace. But you must recognize who is in charge. If you do not do that, we're going to do to you what we did to China. We're going to do to you what we did to the Abbasid Caliphate headquarters in Baghdad. We're going to do to you what we did to so many different nations. That either you recognize who's in charge and submit to the authority of the Khan, or be destroyed. And they are literally the ones who dominated majority of the world, of the old world system. And during Pax Mongolia, the West will learn from Pax Mongolia the things needed to eventually make the West dominant. Because it is Pax Mongolia that spread the idea of the use of the gun. Because China was the one with the gunpowder, developing it, and they spread it. At the same time, they're the ones who did the globalized passport system first. They're the ones who did the postal globalized system first. And he did so many things. And so when the West talks about Marco Polo, and he teaches you him throughout the school system, Marco Polo was the one who was under Kublai Khan. And he learned a lot of information that was needed and written a book on it. And he would later inspire people like Christopher Columbus to travel the ocean blue in the age of exploration, to find another trade route with Asia. Because Marco Polo said that Asia is rich, but the people are throughout the different nations he passed before he reached the Turkic-Mongolic ruler. He witnessed a lot of barbaric and uncivilized acts. So henceforth, the West copied Pax Mongolia, the Mongol peace. And what they did was add in the civilizing aspect, and henceforth gives your Western civilization through your Renaissance, to your Enlightenment, to your Neo-Enlightenment, which I have to explain all these different things in the next subject. But he, Marco Polo, has identified the Yajuj and Majuj in his book, who he considers as Yajuj and Majuj. And I'm going to have to connect this with the concept of the Genghis Khan and all this Pax Mongolia rule. First, coming from the Gok-Turk Khanates to your Mongols rule, and connect us all. Explain to you what the Quran means about the two mountain ranges where the iron and copper was made out of iron and copper. And at the same time, the dark murky water went to the land of the rising of the sun. Who the Zulkarnain is, Allah knows best, but I show you from history. And even the biblical terms confirms what the Quran and Sunnah says and identifies his name. And I say Allah knows best. And I'm going to tie in all of these subjects with the subject of Yajuj or Majuj in the next subject. But he literally mentioned that the and Magog, or as you can call Gog and Magog, because many has translated the word and see it meant Gog and Magog as a group among the Gog Turks, as the and the Mongol is a derivative of the name Magog. That's what a lot was said. But if you look at the tallest mountain in the Caucasus Mountains, it is known as Gog, by whom? The local inhabitants. The land of the rising of the sun has been known. Khorasan is literally the translation of the word land of the rising of the sun, and it literally ends at this barrier that was built by Zulkarnain. And yes, the barrier is made out of iron and copper, and at the same time, in ancient stories of the past, mentions the barrier as a continuous reconstructing itself. You know that he says every time when the Yajuj and Majuj try to dig the barrier, but it reconstructs itself until one says, Inshallah, and it's destroyed. This barrier is known for it in ancient history. And to connect it further, I'm going to expose the myth of people saying that Yajuj and Majuj is underground. So why does he need to build a barrier between the mountain ranges if they're underground? They're regular people. Where do they get their meat from? Where do they get the tree, the wood that's needed to make their arrows, as some of the hadiths will talk about, and some of the weapons they use? They're above the ground. They have been identified based on the Quran and Sunnah and throughout history. Say love us best, but it all fits like a glove. And this subject needs to be expounded upon, and I'm going to explain to you what it means by digging through the barrier until sun rays come out. Because it doesn't mean that they're underground to see it. Zulkarnain went to the place of the rising of the sun. If they make a hole in the barrier, now they can see the other side, which is known as the rising of the sun, where the sun rays go through that barrier, which is a very deep subject. So we don't get a chance to talk about that right now. So now, after the Black Plague, after Pax Mongolia fractures into and dissolves, you find that the Silk Road was dominated by other groups of Turkic people who were not Yajuj or Majuj. And there's a reason why that happened. Because Pax Mongolia, after the Kurotai, the General Assembly, after a Khan dies, they invaded all these lands so quickly. But when the Khan had died, they retreated back a large portion of their forces. And only some remained, which eventually caused the state to dissolve. And they retreated back to the land of origin, because there's a certain timing that he's mentioned that they will be sent. That Daniel will travel all the lands, but right when he dies, that's when the Yajuj and Majuj will be sent after the state of Israel is destroyed. So Daniel travels all the lands except Mecca and Medina. After he dies, the Yajuj and Majuj is then sent. And yes, I would like to show you a very much interconnected history between Jews and warlike Turkic people. That's why a set of the Turkic people converted to Judaism, known as the Khazars, and they did trade with the Jews. And that's why among those who will wait for Dajjal will be followed by 7,000 Jews from Isfahan, and also a large group of not the good Turks, but bad Turkey people would follow him there and make up his army. So there is a direct connection, and these are all deep subjects. The good Turks will stand for the truth, stand for Islam. The bad ones will be the ones to do a lot of dirty works. So now, I mentioned to you, the world is divided into two. Eastern shift, Western shift. Eastern shift is started with the Silk Road, which was started by China and dominated by Turkic Mongolic rule until recently, which was due to a lot of factors of the West being used to cause the world to be headed in one direction. And then the Western system will be built, and what will they do? They would be used to cause the world in one direction, and something big is going to happen. That's why the West is defeated before Dajjal comes, because they are working and supporting the Jews for their Lord and Messiah to come back. But their Lord is the Dajjal. That's why they're rebuilding the Temple of Solomon. How? By supporting the Jews, even though they're not going to be able to fulfill that task. But they're defeated before Dajjal comes. The Jews will see Dajjal, their ruler, their Messiah, but he will be killed, and then they're destroyed next. So both is not going to get what they want. They cannot convert Masjid al-Aqsa into the Temple of Solomon. Why? Because the Hadith says clearly that 4 masjids are protected from Dajjal. And if the leader can't get the job done, what makes you think this group of people, the Jews, will get it done when they're destroyed next? Not going to happen. They may build structures aside or try to do some damage, but they cannot destroy the Masjid al-Aqsa. It's completely protected from Dajjal. So now, the West, led by the U.S., is leading a neo-colonization of the world. But China, on the other hand, is doing something at the same time. It is also doing a neo-colonization of their own through the Belt and Roads Initiative and the debt trap strategy and many strategies with smart city system. Because the smart cities around the world is either US-led or Chinese-led, Chinese-led or US-led. Why is that? Because China said clearly again, and if you study the Quran, it says clearly in the Quran, to look at what happened to those in the past. Go in the land and see what has happened in the past. If you repeat that mistake, then the punishment will repeat, and it's a cycle. So history has a way of repeating itself. And so since China started the Silk Road, and now today it starts a Neo-Silk Road, which is a land-based and sea-based route, the Neo-Old World Order, or the Neo-Silk Road system, which the Eastern Shift system of today is based on, since the old one has ended. A new one is resurrected by China again. And the Hadith is telling you of a revival of Turkic Mongolic rule. And I made it very clear that the Turkic Mongolic rule will be when Persia, when the land of Hind, when China, Indonesia, and all these Far East nations are destroyed. That's why it says about the Neo-Crusades to the commander, let us relieve you of the Arabs, not the Muslims, but the Arabs now. Because the non-Arab territories are destroyed. Yes, part of Mahdi's army will liberate all the way to the land of Hind. And another army will liberate to Constantinople. But then it says, a time is coming when people will have to migrate to Sham. Because why? All these places of non-Arab territories in Africa, in China, in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Persia, Indonesia, Malaysia, all these are destroyed. And on the eastern side will give rise to Turkic Mongolic rule. On the western side will give rise to Western nations of Western Europe. How will it happen? Sailor knows best, but all the doctrines connects with the Quran and Sunnah. And so since China is establishing a Neo-Silk Road system today, it will dominate by Turkic Mongolic rule tomorrow, both in the north and the south parts. The whole old world system, the neo form of it, will have a revival of Turkic Mongolic dominance in these lands. When China is destroyed, when America's north and south is destroyed, that's why when the China headed by a socialist communist identity, socialism with Chinese characteristics headed by the Chinese Communist Party versus capitalism led by the US, when they fight wars around the world through the proxies and through the dominance they have over these areas, before facing each other off, you will then see the collapse of North and South America on the western side, and on the eastern side will be your Far East nations from Persia all the way to China. Malaysia, land of Hind is already in rubbish. Persia is destroyed. And then two will dominate. On your eastern side is Turkic Mongolic rule. On your western side, two is the dominant factor. The Western nations launching neo-crusades in Western Europe, which Eastern Rome is against, and the Muslims and Eastern Romans are against the West, headed by Russia today, and the second power will be the State of Israel. And so this is what dominates the East, this is what dominates the West, and then the Hadith says that Islam will dominate your Eastern lands and Western lands. And at this moment in time, when all this happens, and the Yajuj and Majuj is responsible for the destruction of the nations of the Arabs, while the West is responsible for its besiegement, then the Eastern Romans accept the truth of Al-Islam. That's why Jesus, Prophet Isa is coming back to a masjid built by Muslims and Orthodox Christians. And Sham was part of Eastern Roman territory before it came under Muslim rule. And to this day, that masjid is sacred to both Muslims and Eastern Christians, because the head of Prophet Yahya Alahisalam is said to be there. And the good Christians had helped build this masjid, which now has the white minarets where Prophet Jesus Alahisalam is going to come back at, built by Muslims and Orthodox Christians, this masjid. This did not happen during Prophet Muhammad's time. It did not have a white minaret at that time. But when it was being built, then it happened. So this is a miracle in itself. You see, technology that is headed either by China or Western-led powers, you'll find that the technology is meant to head the world in one direction for Dajjal to rule. It has its benefits, but nobody realizes its ultimate objective. And when it is used to depopulate the majority of the world into war, into neo-colonization, that the West is not wanting to just colonize lands like it used to in the past. You see, all these nations that have independence, these nations don't have no independence because these nations must recognize Western ideology and the West must recognize their independence, similar to how Pax Mongolia was with the Mongol peace. That you want to live in peace, you got to follow what we say. And so there is places still under old version of colonization. But we don't have time to mention those things. But there is a neo-colonization happening. And this neo-colonization is led by US-led West and China-led East. When these two come together and attack each other, then you will see the ultimate chaos mentioned in the Freemasonic motto, order of chaos, order out of chaos. A secular order to now get the world in one direction, so when Dajjal controls the wealth and all these things, people runs to him. And the subject of capitalism, communism, neo-colonization, old-time colonization. The neo-colonization is now meant to colonize not just the lands, not just the nations, but every individual of the nations around the majority of the world. And when technology fulfills its purpose, the technology is going to go out into the post-technological age. And that's why the Mahdi's army is riding with horses, and people are going back to the old weapons. There's hadiths that mention people going back to old weapons, because you are now going to enter the post-technological age. Technology fulfills its purpose and then goes. And this is another subject that is even deep to mention about. So, to get this more clear, that from Prophet Noah's son, eventually formed the nations, and then eventually you have the world divided into Eastern shift system, Western shift system, and tomorrow Islam dominates the world by God's permission. This is what's going to happen, and I have to do a subject on that in more depth to get you to understand what Prophet Muhammad said and how it's going to happen. But to summarize, the main point is, in the past, China started the Silk Road as dominated by Turkic Mongolic rule on your Eastern shift system, on your old world order. And now it gave birth to your Western shift system. And from there, it is led by Western nations all the way up to the world being set for Dajjal to rule. And then the West would go and besiege with the Jews, Muslims up at Medina, up to Medina, and then the Mahdi's army has the duty to fight the Neo-Crusades once the Neo-Crusade says, let us finish this once and for all. Like in the past, the Neo-Crusades said that God with us, and then they were defeated by Salahuddin. This time, it's going to be a lot more fierce, because Islam will dominate the world at this time. And something never happened in history will happen this time, that the city of Rome will be under Islamic control. Alhamdulillah. The Eastern Romans will be ready to accept the truth. So now, while the world is set and the West is defeated, and the Prophet said, once the Romans mention the West, because it tells you in the Hadith where the end battle will be of this set of Romans, will be in the headquarters in the city of Rome, the city that is the center of the West. Then, at this time, something big will happen. And then eventually the Eastern Romans will make up the majority. As we speak, China already establishes a neo-Silk Road order, a neo-Old World system. But it uses both land and sea now. And tomorrow is dominated by Turkic Mongolic rule, and Yajuj or Majuj will be such a destructive force. This time, the worst state it has ever been. The most aggressive. And I'm going to connect in the subject of Yajuj and Majuj what it means by shooting arrows to the sky, and connect their beliefs, Turkic Mongolic rule beliefs of the sky. Gog, Turk, literally means sky. And the Pax Mongols believe that ancestors inhabit the skies, which is a very deep subject. So, from this point in time, when this all happens, Islam dominates. See? So Prophet Noah is the first messenger, second father of mankind. Prophet Muhammad did not come to one community, one nation, like all the other prophets of the past did. One community or one nation. Prophet Muhammad comes to the whole world of all these different nations and stuff to spread the deen. But in the end of times, the majority of mankind and the majority of the Muslims at that time will be Romans, but good Eastern Romans that will accept the truth, while the few that remain to the West either accept the truth or be dealt with by Prophet Jesus, Alahisalam, supported by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I leave everything in the hands of Allah. And I make this part clear to you, because the next part of the subject will have to tie in a lot of elements about how the West functions, how the state of Israel functions, the history of the good Romans, the history of the bad Romans, and give you the elite structure, and give you the Daedalic system of enlightenment and torch, and show you how the Muslims have been deceived. And show you why news is very dangerous to watch. Why do you have to watch the news to understand what's happening in Gaza? You can't just simply look it up, search it. You're going to watch a lot of un-Islamic things, females without hijab, and many haram elements. And it lies to you. Why don't you just simply search in what happens by typing in how much people died? I'll give you examples. And plug that bit in back to what Quran and Sunnah says, and make dua for the people. Instead, you take your guidance from al-Mannat instead of following the Quran. That if the Quran and Sunnah tells you, lower your gaze and do not do certain things, instead, you are following al-Mannat. So inshallah, that will be another subject to mention. These are all rich subjects to talk about, and I leave everything in the hands of Allah. Remember, Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu is the last prophet, last messenger, seal of the prophets, and at the same time, he was given a perfected message that lasts to the day of judgment, and then lasts to eternity. So we know exactly beginning of history, middle of history, end of history, end of world to eternity, based on what was revealed to our beloved prophet, Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu. And we know how Islam will dominate Eastern shift and Western shift system. And then, from this, I have one thing to tell you. Either you can follow the Quran and Sunnah and be the group of truth, or you can be the group of the munafiqs. Because if you study Fitna Duhaima, which is another subject as well to mention about, the Ummah will divide into two groups, one completely of faith and one completely of munafiqs. So let us be of those of faith. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.